I'd like to welcome Patrick Fox. He's Director of Heart of Glass, which grew out of the Creative People and Places programme and is driven by collaboration with the people of St Helens. Tony Butler, CEO of Derby Museums, and Kate Pakenham, exec producer of Donmar Warehouse in London. So Patrick, we're moving on at a pace. Yep. We've shifted our focus to civic engagement, social relevance. Could you start by sharing with us some of the principles that lie at the core of your work at Heart of Glass?
Yeah. So as you rightly mentioned, what we do is we bring artists and communities in the broadest sense together to make new work. And what we're interested in is work that brings people, artists, communities, possibility and action into the room. So there's a lot of ambiguity at the beginning of a project, so it's really important that we have a couple of different principles that are kind of guiding lights for us. And one is a quote that we reference a lot. It's in our development plan, it's in our office, it's on my desktop, and it's a quote by an artist and activist called Lila Watson, and I'll paraphrase, but it's along the lines of, if you're here to liberate me, you can leave. But if you're here because your liberation is bound up with mine, well then let's work together. And that's a really critical touchstone for us, because really what that speaks to me is an approach that is driven by empathy and not sympathy. And I think sometimes in terms of outreach models or kind of charity models, what we have a tendency to do in the sector or historically is to other or to exoticize or to kind of set ourselves up in opposition to the community. And for me, it's really important that we're part of that process. So being empathy driven as opposed to sympathy driven is really key. A kind of second touchstone for us is our commitment and our belief that knowledge lives everywhere, and that when you bring disparate sets of knowledge together, something new and something amazing will happen, and that's where the spark of magic is. So if you bring a Taiwanese visual artist to work with a group of pigeon fanciers in St Helens, then something amazing will happen, inevitably. And that kind of possibility is something to hold on to in projects, and that kind of notion that knowledge lives everywhere. And then the third really is, it's really important for me as a director of an arts organisation to also remember that I am also a citizen. And it's really important for me, given the times that we live in and the challenges facing our communities, to operate in solidarity with different contexts, whether that be the community development sector, the voluntary sector, the community sector. So we are not outside of we're not just part of the life of the arts in St Helens, but we're part of the broader civic life of the town.
I love that, thank you. And so we're going to come back and we're going to hear some more about that project in a little while. But at this moment, I'm going to come to you, Kate, if that's okay. So there's so much that we could explore, but I'd like to focus, if we can, on the all-female Shakespeare Trilogy project that you derived and developed within the women's prison context. Could you describe some of the issues that you were seeking to address with that work?
Yes. The Shakespeare Trilogy started in 2012 and was kind of really inspired by the question that we were asking ourselves, who owns Shakespeare? And it was specifically originally about women's voices. And at the time, in 2012, there'd been a study that looked at women's representation on our stages, and for every 2 men on our stages, there was 1 woman. And in a way, that was that drove this project to sort of challenge that inequality in terms of gender representation, but also celebrate women's voices. And as an organisation that Josie, who's the artistic director of the Donmar, and I had just taken over, and really try and signify a desire to open up the Donmar and to signify change. And so the first production, Julius Caesar, was that, and we intentionally, Phyllida Lloyd, who directed the trilogy, set it in a women's prison to push that challenge around ownership, cultural ownership and diversity further, and give Shakespeare to some of the most voiceless women in our society. And so that's found us developing these productions in a way that sort of grew out over 5 years and took us into women's prisons to try and really develop them as authentically as we could. And it changed us as an organisation hugely for the better.
Thank you, Kate. We're going to hear more about that. I'm going to be back to sort of hear the next chapter of that story. Before that, I'd like to hear from you a little bit, Tony. So we're going to hear you talk perhaps about the ways that you put participation at the heart of everything at Derby Museums today. What would you say were like the main factors that drove that new model at Derby Museum from your perspective?
So Derby Museums existed for over 140 years. So it was founded by the local Philosophical Society, collecting objects for the benefit of the citizens of Derby. And we became an independent trust in 2013, came out of the council, but that also coincided with the kind of the worst exigencies of austerity. So austerity has really hit local government hard. Organisations like ours are much more reliant upon funding from local government than we are from the Arts Council, so museums in cities are at specific risk at the moment. So we knew that we were going to face huge financial challenges. So the light at the end of the tunnel was actually the light of the oncoming train. So there's been a 40% reduction in our funding in 3 years. So we knew we had to make the organisation leaner and fleeter and more inclusive. So all of our curators have got the words co-production in their job descriptions and some of them in their job titles. So secondly, in leadership roles that I've had over the last sort of 15 years or so, I've been really influenced by this idea of asset-based community development. So you don't just look at your physical or financial assets, but also the social capital in your communities and the cultural connections. And so museums are essentially, social spaces where all kinds of people can kind of meet and connect with each other. So we recognise that alongside the knowledge we had about our collections, there was also this huge body of information and knowledge sitting there in our community with also so much energy and willingness to connect with us. So we saw, we wanted to be much more relevant to our community. In the words of sort of the economist Eleanor Ostrom, we saw knowledge as this common pooled resource.
I love that. So there's more to come about the implications of those drivers, those opportunities, and then thinking about what that means for the way that you've evolved the organisation. So Patrick, you set out some principles earlier on of the organisation. Can you tell us some more about what are you doing that's inspired by those principles? So how do they shape action and programme and activity?
I mean, we kind of came into the world in I suppose, a strange way, and that's one of the beauties of the Creative People and Places programme. So when I started, I was based in the rugby club in St Helens, so St Helens Rugby League, Go Saints. And on the Monday morning after I started, there was a queue of people outside this rugby stadium. And I was saying to one of the team, I said, what are they all doing outside? And he said, they're here to talk to the players and the manager about the result on Friday. And I said, well, will they talk to them? And he said, absolutely, they'll talk to them. This club belongs to them. And really, that kind of really stuck with us as a principle in terms of being a listening organisation. And what we've become as a listening project and organisation is we're part of that community, but also it means that we're part of every project. So one of the models that we're really keen on developing, and something that's part of every one of our projects, is that there's an artist, the community, and a producer. And the producer is a kind of creative producer that's part of our team that sits around the table for every project. And what that means is that we're part of the conversation, we're part of the dialogue, we start to accrue this knowledge and it starts to become richer and deeper. And we can start to find those threads between projects. So it means that as the years pass by, every project becomes that little bit deeper and that little bit richer, and we build on previous sets of knowledge. We don't commission at a distance, so that idea of us sending off an artist and a community off over there to do something in isolation, then we don't grow as an organisation, and we're obviously there for the long term, so it's important for us to bring that back in-house. So that producer model and that kind of notion of being kind of always in close dialogue is really important to us.
That's really nice, thank you. And Kate, we've been talking about this project, and I want to sort of acknowledge, Donmar and its reputation and context. So how do you then engage with women in that in that different context, in an authentic way that allowed you and them to express yourselves truly? Because that feels like a challenge for an institution, I suppose, with a certain identity.
Yeah, I think it started really as a creative challenge. It was Phillida and Harriet Walter who initiated Julius Caesar and the whole trilogy, wanted to make sure if we were going to set the productions in a women's prison that they were doing that with the greatest possible authenticity. So the driver initially into this new context for us as an organisation was a creative driver, a driver around creativity and authenticity. And the first thing, and as an organisation, we do a lot of education work, and we have a lot of expertise working with schools, but we've not worked in the criminal justice sector at all. So it was actually initially pretty hard. It turns out to be difficult as an arts organisation to find your way into working in prisons. And so our first stop was with charities, other organisations that have expertise in that area. And so what was critical for us were those partnerships. And we originally linked up with Clean Break, who work with a theatre company working with women in prison and ex-offenders, and which Harriet was the patron of. And we worked with them to find actors who could join the company and who would be who would be in that original production of Julius Caesar, and then went further with them and were introduced by them to a women's prison, two women's prisons in Yorkshire, Newhall and Ascombe Grange, and there met a brilliant woman called Rachel Conlon from York St John University, who runs a prison partnership project. So for us, and she does a weekly drama session in those prisons, and we engaged with her, and that developed a relationship between our rehearsal room and that drama group, who would weekly speak to each other about the development of the play. So those women in prison their voices became part of our creative process. And that developed further, and we ended up taking the productions back into those prisons and sharing the work that had partly come from them. So it was a very, very integrated, creative process that then became an outreach education process, but it was a really circular. It wasn't, everyone was in it together, and we were totally reliant on these expert partners as we as an organisation learned, changed, and grew our social mission. And creative mission as well.
I can really see that. I can really see that kind of, that extraordinary creative intention at the beginning, or inspiration at the beginning. The partnerships that enabled the programme to grow, and the extraordinary artists that you were working with, extraordinary partners, and the depth of that impact across both your organisation and the ones that you were working with.
And just, I think, picking up on, it's about time as well. This was a 5-year project. You can't parachute in and expect to kind of know everything. In fact, you can parachute in and learn it's about individuals. This is not a brand. This has nothing to do with the Donmar as a brand. This was about passionate individuals who cared deeply about what they could do as artists and as citizens, actually. And I think it's really important that for me, it wouldn't have worked without that time and without the individual's passion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Tony, what does putting participation at the heart mean for your museum?
I think for the organisation it means trying to kind of reimagine a museum as a civic institution for a very diverse and fluid 21st century. So we use a human-centred design theory in all of our work. So we've created a human-centred design handbook, which you can download. It's all open source, so Google Derby human-centred design and you can get your hands on that. So it puts the needs of users as the starting point. So the largest manifestation of this is a new programme that we have. It's a £16.5 million programme to create the first UK Museum of Making in Derby Silk Mill, the site of the world's first factory. And here local people have helped create a new museum from scratch. We are co-designing with them, and they've literally helped us make fixtures, fittings for the organisation. We built a workshop with CNC machines, laser cutters, where people can come in, be trained how to use that, learn new skills, and a manifestation of this has been building new cases or new storage boxes. And alongside that, they're also telling us stories as they make. So it feels like we are making a museum together with our community. And our other sites, we run 3 museums. At the City Museum and Art Gallery, we have a new natural history display that we built 3 years ago. And we put an open call out to everybody in the community to help us amass knowledge of your natural world. We wanted people to recognise that they had a place in nature, whether they lived in a cottage in the country or 3 stories up in a tower block. And we ended up getting a kind of phalanx of support from interested amateurs to ornithologists to people from the university, all came with this sort of collective desire to build and to make and to share their knowledge within this sort of civic space. And now, more challengingly, we're developing a program called Your Place in the World, which is a kind of timely look at our world cultures collection. I talked earlier about Derby Museum being founded in the 19th century. It is essentially a colonial institution. We've got material from South Asia, from Africa, from the Pacific Islands, all brought back during times of imperialism. So we're working with all the communities of the city, with refugee groups, with civil society organisations, to really kind of get to the nub of what it means to have these things in our community. So practical examples of that, we're taking objects for walks. So our staff are going around the city with objects and having serendipitous encounters with people. So talking to skaters in the town centre about what their feelings are around African masks, or we went to a florist in Normanton Road, which is a very sort of multicultural part of the city, and this florist is run by a guy from Egypt. So we put a 2,500-year-old Egyptian headrest on his counter for 2 days, and he used that to strike up new conversations with visitors. So it was kind of demystifying the notion that we are the keepers of and non-sharers of material culture, but all this stuff belongs to our citizens, and our citizens deserve to be able to share it and share our stories with them.
Thank you, Tony. I knew that was going to give me goosebumps, your answer to that question. Patrick, what's different and distinctive in your approach, and what have the challenges been?
We've been on a bit of a wild ride, really.
Yeah.
So we've commissioned 150 artists. We've worked with the broad range of communities of place and interest, over 50,000 people, reached big audiences and stuff. And every project starts with a conversation or a commitment to kind of journey into the unknown. It usually starts with a cup of tea, and then we make this commitment together to work in partnership to realize something new. And I think that the hardest point really is always that initiation. It's always that jumping off point, that kind of like that step over the ledge together. Because the truth is that there's no rules. There's no rules, and we never know what it is that we're going to make at the end. But the content dictates the structure. So, for example, we're working on a project longitudinally at the moment, which is a 12-year residency with artist Mark Storer. And the reason that's a 12-year residency is that he began working with a group of men who are in a similar age range to himself, who, based on where they live, statistically, will die 10 years before people in other parts of the country. And so the group and Mark decided that they had to outrun that statistic as part of this project, and they're working on a 12-year project. And we obviously operate within funding cycles like everyone else in the room does, but actually no, we will do that, and we will find a way to make that happen. The content dictates the structure. So yeah, there are no rules really, and I suppose thinking about who gets to make art and where it gets made, the answer to both of those questions for us would be, well, everyone gets to contribute to the making of meaning, or should, and it belongs everywhere. So it belongs on a beautiful stage like this, in a white cube, but it also belongs in a chip shop or in a taxi cab. And that's not a caveat around quality, that's just a different place for people to encounter work, or for work to manifest, really. So I think keeping that door of possibility open for as long as possible is sometimes the trickiest challenge, especially when you're working in partnership, and especially when you're trying to break new ground. So if you're working with a housing association or with a health body, people are very output and outcome focused, and just to keep that door ajar for that little bit longer, because something might just happen, that's part of our job, really.
Amazing, thank you. Kate, you've already alluded a little bit to the impact on the organisation of this work. How has that sort of very personal, individually motivated and driven work of this, artist-driven programme, how has that affected the organisation's creative practice and ambitions beyond this particular engagement, would you say?
Well, I think actually picking up what you're saying, Patrick, about the sort of standing on the ledge, and I mean, in 2012, it was the highest risk thing we were thinking about doing, this project. It could have gone up in flames. We didn't know. And, we found good partners, we found good people, and we had great purpose. and we jumped together. And I think the learning for the organisation, the confidence that risk-taking has given us, that goes across a kind of creative, social purpose, and actually financially, it also looked very risky for us. There's a lot of times, a lot of unsupported effort that the organisation needs to make, unfunded. But actually, through the conversations that we were having, because they were so deeply felt by the individuals, that infiltrated into the organisation, and actually we found support. We found we were able to change. We were very heavily funded by philanthropy at the Donmar. 55% of our income is fundraised, so it's a very strange business model. But we found that, and it seemed like that would be a big risk to take those philanthropists and sponsors into the sort of social, this social mission. Actually, we found quite the opposite, because you could engage in a depth of conversation through great art. I mean, the art could never be compromised, but that you could engage more deeply with everyone, and that really we learned. So there was a holistic impact for the whole organisation that I think also just changed everyone working there. All the artists and all the people in the admin team, everyone felt differently about what they were doing in making theatre.
Amazing, thank you. We've got about 3 minutes left in this panel, so I'm going to ask each of you one more question with a 1-minute answer attached, if that would be possible. So I appreciate that's a really tall order, but Tony, could you share just a quick personal moment that illustrates the power of your model of working?
So it's just 2 things, but 30 seconds each. One, it's been really challenging to us as individuals because the things we're being told by our communities are really challenging. So we spent a day with the West Indian Community Association who basically turned around and said to us, your organisation in the past has been racist, because there's nothing in our collection, nothing in what you do which talks to me about my place in the world. And another was, again, what Patrick talks about, moving from sympathy to empathy. One of our team was taking some combs out to a Turkish barber shop as part of our object walks. And she said she turned up at 9:30 and she sat on the threshold, door was shut. There were about 5 guys waiting to get their hair cut. Everyone was talking in Turkish. She said, and I just couldn't go over the threshold. I felt I didn't belong. And she said at that moment, that was when she saw that that's how those people would have felt coming to the museum for the first time.
Brilliant, thank you. And Patrick, what tips or practical actions, again in a minute, could you share with the audience?
Okay, I'll talk in sound bites then.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the creative people in places mantras is don't do too much without thinking or think too much without doing. And I think that's something that we really hold true. I think we can disappear into rhetoric sometimes. Yeah. It's very important to be active. I think we need to all be constantly examining our own power and privilege. So what do we have that someone else needs? What do they have that we need in order to make work happen? And then the third thing, I suppose, we're set up exclusively to work with artists and communities and in context, but for the institutions or the organisations out there, there are a lot of kind of unloved community departments, interpretation teams, education teams that are often siloed within organisations. And I think what Tony's talking about and what has come through this morning is that can be the engine. That's your integrity. That's your connection to the world that you inhabit. And that makes you relevant and it makes you vital. And I think giving those spaces a bit more love and attention sometimes can go a long way.
Beautiful, thank you. And finally, Kate, what advice would you give anyone who's interested in engaging long-term in this way? You talked about the 5-year project.
I think I've got 3 Ps. Purpose, be really clear on that, and as an organisation, and articulate it to your team. I think I have 3 Ps, I might have forgotten all of them. Partnership. I think those partners were critical for us. Look beyond yourself, outside of yourself. I think it's totally changed what education and outreach is in our organisation. It's totally sort of platform that. And patience. It takes time, and really just take time, listen, and passion. 4 Ps.
I love that. Thank you so much. So I'm worried that I'm going to run out of superlatives by the end of these 4 panels. But it's been moving, inspiring to hear the work that you're doing and the transformational ways that you're thinking about embedding relevance and participation within your work. It's been extraordinary, hasn't it? So again, I'd like, if you'd like to know more about the organisations that you've heard from just now, then access the conference website, read their case studies. There are longer versions. They're not required to answer in 1 minute in those documents. We've also commissioned 64 Million Artists, Culture Shock Media with 1218.org, the Lowry and UCL to share other case studies of similar depth and practicality, and you'll find those on the conference website as well. But for now, I'd like to thank Patrick, Kate and Tony. Thank you very much indeed.